Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Mid-City TV. I am here again tonight on Wednesdays. Every Wednesdays, I'm here with Carlos Sosa, who is a tour guide, has been a tour guide in Yucatan for over 30 years, and is a wealth of knowledge of Yucatan. And today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the Haciendas of Yucatan. As many of you probably know, if you live here or if you have come to visit, you've definitely gone and seen a hacienda. They're incredibly beautiful. They have a fascinating and a little bit of a dark history about the Hennakin. Well, with the Hennakin, that was the gold, the green gold of Yucatan, and what really brought so much wealth and power into Yucatan, and some of the fantastic buildings that you see here, a lot of the culture as well. But we're going to talk a little bit also about the dark history and about, of course, the slavery that was involved in the haciendas, which is, of course, a plantation. At the end of the day, it was a plantation. So we're going to touch a little bit on this fascinating part of the history that is very much part of Yucatan, and you can go see the haciendas now, and a lot of them are used for weddings, they're used for parties, they're hotels and nice restaurants. It's really a beautiful day trip to go spend a day or a weekend out at a hacienda. So I'm going to bring on Carlos, and we're going to talk about the histories of haciendas in Yucatan. So here we go. Carlos, hello.
Hola.
Again. Hello, hola, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Yo muy bien, muy bien.
Veo que sigues agarrando color de la playa.
Sí, estoy muy colorada, ¿no? Con muchas pecas. I got lots of freckles. I'm still out at the beach in Chuchulup. And by the way, if you didn't see our first episode, I think it was now, what, 4 weeks ago, Carlos, or so?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Chuchulup and the asteroid that hit here 66 million years ago. And so I'm actually in like the heart of where the asteroid hit. Lots of
Haven't you been dreaming with dinosaurs?
What was that?
Haven't you been dreaming with dinosaurs?
I've been dreaming with dinosaurs, with shooting stars. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's beautiful out here, and yeah, I have lots of new freckles from my daily walk on the beach. So yes, I'm thrilled to be out here for sure. So so Carlos, I was telling everybody today that we are going to be talking about the history of the haciendas in Yucatan, which for me is a really fascinating topic because I personally love going to haciendas. They're beautiful, they're in nature, and it's such a fascinating part of the Yucatecan history that it also has a dark side of that history, which involves slaves and the slavery and slavery of Mayans and of other cultures as well. So we're going to kind of bring us back in history a little bit and tell us maybe before Henequen how the haciendas were used and how they kind of got started in Yucatan.
All began right at the beginning of the colonial times. We're talking about the mid part of the 16th century. Mm-hmm. When the Spanish arrived to Yucatan and after they began the conquest, as you know, Yucatan is a land where there's no minerals, no metals, nothing that could be meaning some kind of attraction for the conquerors that came to Mexico, like other parts of the country, like gold and silver and other kind of metals that could be found in different regions. Yucatan doesn't have anything like that. So the only thing that they could do actually around here was in a way to divide and split the land and give to each one of these Spanish that came a portion of land. That they start calling them encomiendas. Officially, they could not be owned. They could not be having the people like slaves according to the treaty of the West Indies, but that was only on paper. Once they were here, the Maya, whatever was included or encircled in that portion of land that was given to each one of these Spanish that came here was their own property. So they were exploiting the Mayas who lived there, and as we have said before, Yucatan is a land where we don't have any water on the surface. So agriculture is really tough. We depend always on the rain And in some cases nowadays, because of all these developments on techniques, we got irrigation systems, but not on those days.
So okay, so we're talking about, and so we're talking about what years?
We're talking about the second half of the 16th century, 1550 to 1600s. Okay. So those encomiendas were producing what they used to be produced in those days: corn, beans, honeybee, wax, cotton. And shortly before, or shortly after the colonial time began, the Spanish started bringing cattle from Spain, horses and cattle and sheep and pigs. So they turned what was called encomienda. And at the encomienda, the Mayas had to pay taxes to the encomendero, that was the name that was given to the Spanish, that was the owner of that land, to the crown, to the government, to the state government, and to the church. The church was always working together with encomenderos, because the church said that every encomendero had the obligation of providing a place where the monks could catechize the Mayas.
Right.
Certain times there was a conflict between them because of that situation, especially when Friar Diego de Landa was in the Yucatan. De Landa was a very intense man that was trying to convert Mayas all the way to Catholic religion, and when they refused to do that, he punished them. And
which we talked about in another video, our video about Mani.
Exactly. And what happened on those days, the encomenderos complained because all this punishment was diminishing the production. And they were not really worried about the Mayas. They were worried about the production that was being diminished because of the mistreatment, because of the injuries that were given to the Mayas by Landa and the other monks. So this is something that was going on for a few years. Once the cattle was here, and they changed the figure of encomienda, and they called it estancia. Estancia is a little more organized organization, a little more organized system, where they will have cattle, they will have all the kinds of animals, domestic animals, but at the same time they increased the production of corn because they were feeding the cattle with corn.
And so now we're talking about 1700s, like the beginning of the 1700s.
We're talking about 1600s. We're talking about the end of the 1700s and beginning of the 1800s.
Okay.
And once they start working on these places like that, then another figure show up. That was the one that was called acasillado. Acasillado was the name that was given to the Maya that was working permanently at the hacienda, with obligations and no rights. And they were supposed to have
obligations. No, right, but were they paid workers?
They were paid workers, but the payment was so low that they couldn't really survive with that. So they had to be, in a way, using or eating, being supported by what they were producing, even when part of that was given to the hacienda, to the estancia owners. Later on, cotton was still produced, and then the Spanish were exporting a lot of these things to Spain, like honey, wax, cotton, the leather, the skin of cattle.
So cotton was also a crop here in Yucatan.
Right, cattle was a crop, and it was big. It was disappearing gradually because of the different interest on what they were doing. And also later on, there were other situations that made some crops being stopped in the Yucatan because of our agrarian reform that was established in the 1930s. But on that time, everything was being shipped to those places. But we have to mention also that since the very beginning of the colonial times, the conflict between Mayas and Spanish was there. So there were always some kind of small battles in certain regions where Mayans refused to do what the Spanish wanted to. They were punished and they rebelled. So this kind of situation was like a snowball. It was growing and growing and growing and growing. And as the time went on, and the Spanish were more Spanish coming to these places and they needed more land, they started to confiscate the land to the Mayas that were a little bit, most of those activities were very close to Merida. But with the arrival of these Spanish, they were just extending the section that they were dominating. So they were going further away from the city, confiscating the land of the Mayas. So that created more friction between the groups. And there was a moment that the battles were constantly or were more frequent, and until when it turned into hacienda, there was a more organized system, which was producing. Hacienda was it was like a concentration of wealth, where they could do a lot of different things. They had sugar cane, and mainly the sugar cane was found on the southern side of Yucatan, like Oshkushkap, Tecash, and those places. That's where the sugar plantations were, and they were making rum. It's called Trapiche, one of the haciendas that is a beautiful hacienda, one of the few that has three stories on the main building is Tabi. The Tabi, I don't know if it can be visited yet. It was a hacienda that was owned by a family that was called, well, there were 7 families. The last family that owned it was Manzanilla, who I don't know if they sold it or they just donated to the state government in order to create a program of agriculture in that place. And there was a project to do something in that place, like a hotel or anything like that was going to be run by the government. I don't know what happened there.
And where was it?
Beautiful. Tabi.
And Tabi is where?
Tabi is between Tikul and Oshkushkap.
Oh, okay.
In that region. That's where the sugar plantation was. There was another one in the same region, or there were a few others, but Tabi was one of the large ones. And that was sugar.
Real quick here, just to get a little reference, was this the same time that, let's say, Cuba had their sugar cane? Was that the same?
We're talking about the beginning of the 19th century, 1800s. It's about the same time.
Yeah, this was all in the Caribbean.
Exactly. And remember that one of the things that happened in Cuba, there were so many diseases that were brought by the Spanish to that island, and practically the natives were wiped out by the Spanish.
Right. Yeah.
So this is the reason why they start. Well, slavery from Africa was always practiced since the 1600s. They were always going to Africa, kidnapping people and selling them to Brazil, to US, to all these different parts of the Caribbean. So that is the reason why the black people population is large in many of these islands.
Right.
And remember that I mentioned to you that at the beginning of the War of Casas, there was a governor of Yucatan, and together with some of the hacienda owners, were selling Mayas as slaves to Cuba.
Right, but that's jumping forward a little bit. Let's continue.
Yeah, that's going too far ahead.
Then I don't know all about it. We get lost. Okay.
Well, so the production.
What?
The production of the haciendas was the sugarcane, was wax, it was cotton, it was corn, it was honey, of course cattle, and there were a few other crops that they had. Most of it was consumed in the Yucatan, and some of those goods were sold, or it was sent to Spain, to Europe. With the beginning of the Hennequen always existed in Yucatan. It's a native plant, so the Mayans have been using Henequen for a long time. And even in these haciendas, estancias, and encomiendas, they were making
and a crop, plantation crop, and they used the labor that was there with a lot of the Mayan people that was there to work the land, and they lots of different crops that they were using. So they already had these buildings, or some of these buildings, sort of established. And also within these crops, Hennequen is a native plant of Yucatan. And I know the Maya used Hennequen for rope before, like back in their civilization. So it was always known that rope could be made from this plant that looks like, it's an agave, which is the same.
It's
plant.
Agave. It's an agave. It's called the agave forcroides. That's the species of agave forcroides. That's the green one that we have here.
Or the green agave, right?
The green agave, exactly.
Agave. And just so we know, the tequila agave, which is not in Yucatan, not native to Yucatan, that's in the central part of America, or of Mexico, is the blue agave, right?
It's the blue agave. That is called the Werner agave.
Okay, right. So the Hennequen is an agave, right? And you can make some tequila out of it, as you were saying before, but it's a very low grade.
If you want to get drunk, you can use it.
Right. Okay. So when did Hennequen start becoming a major player And when did, you know, the haciendas?
It began to play a big role on the economy of Yucatan on the mid part of the 19th century, because that was the time when the battles and the situation between the Mayas and the what we call criollos, which are the sons of the Spanish that were called peninsulares that came from Spain, and criollos are the sons of the Spanish that were born in Yucatan or in Mexico. Sure. When that situation between criollos and peninsulares and the Mayas rose and became bigger, that's when the war of castes began, which is wrongly called a war of castes. It was a social movement. It was not really a war of castes. But anyway, it's known like that, and let's leave it that way. 1847, that's when the war began. And at that moment, all these haciendas, or most of them, collapsed because there was such an activity, a war activity between these two different groups, that a lot of the employees or workers of the haciendas ran away and joined the rebels. Many of the other Mayas remained there and stood on the side of the patron, of the owner of the hacienda, the hacendado, but many of them left. So in that time, the economy collapsed. So they needed an option, because they could not really get all this activity back because it was going to be taking so long and control the situation. So they started to look at the Hennakin. And besides, Henequen was used, or the ropes, that was the only source or the only material that was used in the world in order to make ropes, the Henequen, the fiber.
Right.
It was used for speed, for embaling cargo, for roping cattle, whatever needed a rope was made out of the Henequen.
Right, yes.
So they look in that position, in that direction, so the hacienda owners decided to go in that way. Now, since the beginning of the times of the colonial times till the beginning of the 20th century, the information that we have, they were built 1,300 haciendas.
Wow.
Half of them were built after the 1850s to produce Hennakin.
Okay.
And around
so we're talking about 650, more or less.
About that. So we're talking about roughly about half of it.
Right.
But anyway, the total number goes around 1,300. Most of them concentrated around Merida, a radius of about 80 kilometers around Merida, which is a land that was not really that good for agriculture because of the condition that was very rocky, topsoil that is really shallow, no water, and Hennakin doesn't need water, doesn't need good soil. So it was perfect land in order to grow the Hennakin or the agave.
Right.
So around the 1850s, a man, Jose Esteban Solis, invented la raspa or la raspadora, which is the machine, the equipment that shreds the leaf of the Hennakin that is called penca to extract the fiber. So that allowed the hacienda owners to shred over 6,000-7,000, about 6,000-7,000 of leaves per journey. So that allowed them to have a lot of material, a lot of fiber that was being put in bales and shipped out of the Yucatan. In Yucatan, the ropes were not made. The only thing that was made here was the prime matter, that was the fiber.
Oh, okay.
It was sent to Europe and it was sent to the US. So those places where the factories were located, and they were making different sizes of ropes. Since thin ones until the thick ones that were used for ships.
Okay, so Yucatan exported the raw Hennakin leaves.
Not the leaves, the fiber.
Not the fiber, the raw fiber, exactly.
Fiber,
And they shipped it to the United States in the US.
The States and Europe. There were some ropes made here, but that was really for other kind of activities, like roping the cattle on the ranches and baling cargo or products like corn or sugarcane, whatever. But it was not really for a commercial use purpose, a massive commercial purpose. It was made out of Yucatan.
And you know, one thing that I do want to mention as well is that it was called Henequen, but it was also called sisal, right?
Well, and sisal, it's a version. There are two different. There is a plant that is called sisal, but sisal is not like agave. It doesn't have thorns, and it's a little bit smaller. And the fiber is finer, the fiber, but it's not as good in quality and quantities that could be commercialized. But apparently the name of sisal that was used was mainly because the export of this fiber was from the port of Sisal.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
northwest of Merida. So everything, Progreso did not exist on those days. Progreso was until the 1880s, more or less, when it was founded. But before that time, everything went through Sisal. And most likely all this kind of paperwork that was done in order to know what kind of material, where it was coming from, it says Sisal, Yucatan. And it's easy to say Sisal than Hennakin.
Right.
So
well,
a lot of people start calling Sisal to identify it.
Here, let me see if you guys can see this. Let's see if I can make it a little
Sisal
bit.
will be on the right and top angle.
Oh, it doesn't actually have it here, but it's over here, right? Correct?
Uh-huh.
Where's Sisal?
It's too small. I can't really see it, but it will be.
Yeah. And it doesn't say exactly Sisal, but I know it's going to be over here somewhere. But maybe
if you look at it, there is like a little corner on the left side of the map. It's very close to that, between that corner and the red point that I think is Progreso. Between those 2 points, that's where Sisal is.
Right. Okay.
It's actually, the distance from Merida is about 55 kilometers.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been to Sisal. It's one of my favorite beaches.
And the beaches and the water is beautiful there, and the seafood.
Beautiful. If you haven't been there and you're watching this, I definitely would recommend going to Sisal, and you know a little bit about the history. That was the first major port, correct, Carlos? The major port that would export all the Henequen, or what they call
the bales. The bales were export from Sisal.
And I heard that they called it Sisal because when it arrived to Europe, it arrived in boxes that said Sisal, the name of the port, on the side of the box.
Sisal, Yucatan, Mexico.
Yeah, and so then they would call
the fiber with Sisal.
Sisal, yeah. Okay, so yeah, so this was happening, and so the Hennakin, this boom, there became a huge boom, and it made Yucatan very, very wealthy. One of the wealthiest places in the world at the time.
In those days, yes. There were more multimillionaires per capita in Yucatan than anywhere else in the world.
Right. And so we are talking, can you give us the years here?
We're talking about the end of the 19th century, 1880s, 1890s or so. It wasn't until almost the end of the 19th century when the situation in the whole country was getting a little bit upside down because of Porfirio Diaz, that was a dictator, that it brought a lot of development on the country, a lot of progress in many ways, but behind the scene, the people were totally forgotten. And this is exactly what caused the revolution, as it has happened in many other countries. Russia, France, the poor people are the ones who rebelled because they were dying, they were starving to death. And this is what happened in Mexico too. And at those days, that's when the Hacienda started collapsing on the production of the Henequen. They recovered that a little bit after the revolution ended, and it was settled that way. And they had a few other years, a few more years of good business until on the 1930s. Lázaro Cárdenas, that was the president of Mexico, nationalized the oil company and in a way ended the figure of the hacienda and created what is called the Reforma Agrarium, or the agrarian reform. The agrarian reform that was putting some kind of limits. We could not plant and harvest certain kinds of products around here because it was going to be competing with other regions of the country, these kind of things. That is why cotton, in a way, was not really practical. Cotton had been forgotten since before. But there was some kind of situation. And what happened also, the government expropriated all the land of the haciendas, but 150 hectares that was given to each one of the haciendas that was still working and existing in the Yucatan.
Right. But let's go back a little bit to that boom of the haciendas. So it was like I was saying, and like you were saying, it brought just an enormous amount of wealth here. But I do want to touch on this because, you know, a couple of years ago, there was a restaurant that opened that was called the Casa Divina. And I know that there was a lot of, you know, the social media was blowing up and how could they name a restaurant that? And some people didn't really mind one way or another. So I put out a question in my social media. I said, well, you know, the Yucatecans, are you offended by a restaurant being called the Casa Divina? And so I did a little bit of research there, and not only with my social media, but also I wrote an article about it and wrote about the history of this. And really, I mean, how it came out in the social media was that in general, yeah, some people were offended. Most people were like, well, it's part of our history. You know, we're not really that offended.
We know what segment of the society got offended. That is clear.
Right. Well, okay. So let's talk a little bit about that here, because in the United States, of course, when we talk about a plantation, it goes hand in hand with talking about slavery, and very much showing the abuse and the misjustice and everything that evolved from slavery after that. And here, you know, when I post about haciendas, and because I'm a fan, I love going to haciendas, they're beautiful. And when I talk about a little bit of the history, I always get comments from my public that says, you know, why is nobody talking about the slavery that was happening at the haciendas? Or, you know, that you do find it in history books, etc., but it's not really something that's widely talked about. And so I want to kind of just talk about a little bit like what was going on at the haciendas there, because obviously they had to use they had a system that was called like a contract slavery. So people were actually paid, but like you said, paid very little and paid from money from each hacienda. So if they left the hacienda, they couldn't actually spend the money anywhere else. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Go ahead.
Sure. It was a system that was being modified with the time. At the very beginning, as I told you, they were paying taxes. Then when they became what is called acasillados, they were getting paid, but the paid was really practically nothing. But when everything was more complex and more organized, and there were more activities at the haciendas, there was more production, there was more money coming in, they started to change this kind of situation. When we're talking about haciendas, let's talk about a little before the Henequen epoch. Situation was very much the same through the time. But when the hacienda came, when they needed to produce a lot of fiber because of the demand of this product, that's when the whole thing changed. That's exactly when everything made a 180-degree switch to the other direction, and that's when it changed. There were acasillados, again, the same acasillado, which will be the permanent worker that was at the hacienda, that had a house that was provided by the hacienda owner. They gave him certain kind of help with food, with beans and corn and salt and these kind of things, but the rest of it, they had to buy it. They had a salary, but it was really a very low salary. And in order to control them and to keep them on the place, the hacienda became like a small village. They have a medical post, they have carpentry, they have all the activities that were needed in order to keep the hacienda working. They didn't, of course, they never had a school. they had a lot of other things. And one of the things that people needed is some kind of distraction in a way. So the patron of the hacienda, the festivities that were every year, it was a huge party holiday for the inhabitants of the hacienda. So there were dances, what we call vaqueria, there were bullfights, there was so much fun and party that was given, everything was paid by the hacienda owner for the people. But everything else, clothing, some tools, they had to buy it. We're not talking about shoes, we're talking about sandals, which sometimes they made it out of leather. But anything else that they needed, like sugar or coffee or whatever they wanted to eat, meat or whatever like that, they had to pay it. They had to buy it. As they didn't have, and also loans that were given to them for the festivities, for the air, for the other, that people are it's very common to find how people, in order to get religious activities, they don't care getting debts in order to be able to participate on that. But later on, all these debts that were being created, they were a place that was called the company store, or tienda de raya. Tienda de raya was just a grocery store, a store where they have everything. They have clothes, they have boots, and they have weapons, tools, and sugar, and whatever you needed, whatever you wanted. But your salary was not good enough to buy that. So there was always a debt that was growing and growing. There was no official coin, official currency to pay them. So every hacienda created their own coins that could be only used in the company store of that particular hacienda. They could not use it outside. So they had to spend it, and not sometimes, most of the time, the item was 5 times expensive than it could be acquired outside. So you can imagine that all this debt was never going to end, and it was inherited. It was inherited by the sons of the person who acquired that debt. And there was another section, another kind of workers that were called peones. They were hired according to the need of the hacienda on the crop days, or there was a lot of production, or they needed more hands at that moment to be working. So they called peones, and they just brought in, work, and go, get paid, and goodbye, I see you. But with all that kind of situation, hacienda owners, most of them lived in Merida. And there was a capataz or a mayordomo that was in charge of the production of the hacienda while the owner was away. And normally this man, in order to be in good terms with the owner, he was very cruel with the Mayas, because he wanted all these people to produce without any rest. And punishments, whoever defied the authority of these people was going to be punished in front of everyone. There was a tradition that every morning when the people were called to start the journey, whoever had done something wrong the day before was going to be punished in front of everyone. And that was a message to the rest of them. If you do something wrong, this is what's going to happen to you. And there were jails that they have, or called calabozos, in every one of the haciendas, where they were just put in jail because they misbehaved, or they didn't obey, or they got sick and they couldn't produce what they were supposed to, and a lot of people got killed. I mean, died because of the punishment. They were so weak, they were so under a nutrition that was considered to be terrible. So all these people were in that situation, and the sons that were born from that couple and the hacienda, they will be 10, 12 years old. They start working with the father because they needed more hands to do that, and they will be inheriting the debt of the man with the company store, with the tienda de raya. And of course, all this kind of abuses to the people and all this kind of punishment. It's the dark story behind the glamour of the hacienda, behind all this wealth and all this money, all these fortunes that were created there. There was always something that it was bad, sad, and totally inhumane. That in many ways you could say that. But the Mayans were not the only ones. During the War of Castes, a lot of these people got sold to Cuba as slaves. A lot of people abandoned the haciendas, and there was a shortage of labor. So what happened? During Porfirio Diaz regime, there was a colonel that was a friend of Porfirio Diaz that got the concession.
Hold on, Carlos, can you tell us, okay, the Porfirio Diaz regime was in what years?
It was from the 1880s, 1870s, 80s until the 1912, 1914. That was exactly because of the revolution. His regime ended in that time.
Right.
And then when these Mayas abandoned the hacienda because of the War of Castes and they left, they were short of funds to be working at the haciendas. So Diaz gave a concession to his friend. So this man that was a military was kidnapping Yaquis in the state of Sonora. And he used to bring them by train from, and that situation in Sonora was together with the situation that was another military that was a governor of that were taking the land away from the Yaquis. So the way how they were taking the land away was by killing the Yaquis, but they could make a business by not killing them, by selling them like slaves to the hacienda owners. So they brought thousands of Yaquis from Sonora to Yucatan to be working as slaves at the haciendas. Of course, because of the weather that is very humid and it's totally different to the kind of weather that the Yaquis were used to, they didn't live longer than a year because of the extreme conditions that they were working, bad nutrition, away from their families, or if the family was brought in, the children or the women, they were in bad conditions. So there was always, the Yaquis it's a people that is really fear. I mean, it's brave. So many of them refused the mistreatment and they were punished, and many of them were killed. And after that also, there were two other groups that were also used as workers, but they were not kidnapped. They were invited to come, promising them that they're going to have a good job, they're going to get a lot of money out of these ones, and they invited Chinese and Koreans. And once they were here, what I told you, I don't remember. It was not written. So they became practically slaves again, and that kind of situation.
Right, yeah.
So all this was going on until the end of the revolution, that officially the slavery was abolished since the 1950s and 60s with Benito Juarez, but it was never practiced. It was only on the law, but it wasn't until Juarez really stepped into this, and it took a harder position against the governor of Yucatan and the hacienda owners that were selling Mayas as slaves. When that ended the traffic of slaves, but it didn't end the system that was established on the haciendas. It kept going.
Yeah, the trafficking, the slaves from Sonora to here?
No. The traffic of Mayas to Cuba. That was in the 1850s and 60s.
Okay.
That ended up, but later on, around the beginning of the 1900s, that's when the traffic of Yaquis from Sonora started.
When the caste war came in, Maya joined the rebels in the caste war against the Creoles.
Exactly, yeah. And that is the reason why they had a shortage of hands to be working on the haciendas. Actually, there are 3 excellent books that you can recommend to the audience to read about that. One of them is called Mexico Bárbaro.
Oh, okay.
They only need the names. The author, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it will come. One of them is Straben, the other one is John Reed, and the other one is I don't remember the other one. It's 3 books that you could get. Mexico Bárbaro. La Rebelión de los Colgados, which is a rebellion of the hang up people, the ones that were hung up. La Rebelión de los Colgados.
Colgados. The ones that were hung? Like.
Exactly. And that means colgado.
Okay, de los colgados.
The War of Castas, La Guerra de Castas de John Reed.
War of the caste war, right? The caste war.
The caste war. But there are a few of those ones, so they should write down John Reed, which is the author.
Reed is okay. John Reed.
R-E-E-D.
Okay, that was my question. R-E-E-D. Okay, I'll put this up here so that you can see that. All right, so here are some of the books. If you're interested in a little bit more of the history, any history buffs out there, you can look these books up and probably get the English. I'm sure they have an English translation.
Oh, they have.
So going back, just going back to that topic, I didn't kind of finish. I don't think I finished what I was saying when we were talking about La Casta Divina. The Casta Divina were some of the big, powerful hacienda owners, and they were given the name Casta Divina by Salvador Alvarado. Am I correct?
Actually, it was they say that it was Porfirio Diaz who did it.
Oh, really?
Okay.
And so why would Porfirio? The Casta Divina means the divine caste. Right?
The ones that were close to God, and they had these celestial powers in a way.
But yeah, basically. So that's
actually their own lives and souls.
Right.
They did it whatever they wanted to. Nobody told them anything. So there was something that it was
the ruling class, the powerful ruling class.
Exactly.
We all learned about that. We've all probably had to confront that. It's the ruling classes still exist today on many levels. Okay, so let's see. So then, when was the decline of the Hennakin really?
Okay. After the revolution, a lot of the things. During the First World War, there was a boom because they were selling so much of this fiber in order to make roads for all the ships that were being used and all these kind of activities and bailing cargo that was sent up to the front. So there was another time when after Carrillo Puerto, we're talking about the mid part of the 1920s, and then on the 1930s, that's when everything collapsed. In the 1940s, that's when the synthetics appeared. So there was another option instead of besides the fiber of the Hennakin. So that happened to practically end the function of the haciendas. 1961, I think it was December 1961, a company that was a state company that was called Cordemex was created. Cordemex started again the production of Hennakin. And what happened is they created co-ops there were so many co-ops around the Yucatan of people, farmers, that they were hired in a way. They were producing all the Henequen. It was sold to Cordomex. Cordomex had the shredding plants, and they were doing a lot of ropes here, selling the bales of the fiber to other countries too, and all the kinds of articles like carpets and bags and many other things that were being made by Cordomex. It was going to be an incredible company, except that corruption appeared on Cordomex. There were only 2 directors in Cordomex. Those 2 directors, one of them was called Rio Seco, the other one was called Olea Enriquez. That was the other one. Both of them were like pharaohs. They live a life that they have their own helicopter. They have this guy, Rio Seco, one of them, he had lions or tigers in his house as part of the pets. So they spend the money that much. And also the corruption began, like all these workers that were getting paid by Cordomex, when they were clearing the land, they were slashing all the bushes and all that. We have a unit of measure in the Yucatan that's called mecate. That is 20 meters by 20 meters. So they measure all the work that was being done by mecates. Just clearing the land was one amount that got paid by mecate. When they had to cut the big trees in order to open the land, that was another pay. So what happened? These inspectors that were going to the field or out to the fields in order to pay to all these people, they said, okay, I'm gonna pay you 400 mecates when they only have done 50. I will give you 100 mecates to you and 300 stay on this side, and they split the money among everyone on the bank. That was called Banco Rural and Cordomex. So there was such a...
When are we talking about?
When? Since 1961 to 1980 or so. Well, actually in 80 was the end of it. But we're talking about the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And all that corruption made that that Cordomex lost a lot of money. There could have been a very profitable enterprise that could have been done a lot of things, because Yucatan was at that moment the only one that was producing that amount of those quantities of Hennakin. When they started losing that, one of the presidents, Echeverria, gave Tanzania all the technology of the Henequen, and Tanzania began producing Henequen and became a competitor of Yucatan. The problem with Tanzania, they were as corrupt as the ones that were in Cordomex, so they lose it. Nowadays, the country that is controlling the production of Henequen is Brazil.
And so, is it still a big business today?
Oh, yeah, it's still a big business, but not for Yucatan, because Brazil is a monster.
Right. Oh, really?
Brazil is a giant. Brazil is a giant, and they control the market because of the amount of thousands of millions of tons that they produce. And in order to recover that in Yucatan, is going to be just a dream, an opium. I call it an opium dream. It needs a lot of money to be invested. You cannot harvest the leaf of a Henequen or a agave plant after 7 years. And who's going to support, who's going to sponsor all those 7 years without getting any income in order to get all these plants? And besides that, as Brazil has the control of that, they could lower the prices and kill any competitor.
Sure, sure.
Before you start even flying, they will shoot you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's bring it back to Yucatan, because I do want to show people. I have some pictures here of some of the spectacular haciendas, because now, I mean, we can go, like I was saying in the introduction, we can go, a lot of the haciendas are...
This one is called Santa Rosa de Lima.
See, it's beautiful, right, at night.
It's in the town that is called Mashcanu.
Okay.
Well, actually, what happened with the haciendas when they were abandoned around the 1920s or so, they started abandoning the haciendas, and many of them are totally a wreck. They cannot be. If somebody tried to rescue them, they will need a lot of money.
Right.
Some of the ones that were not really that much destroyed are the ones which were rescued nowadays. Big companies, people with a lot of money, rescue them and turn them into hotels, even some of them are like summer houses that they use by the hacienda owners, or restaurants, or places to events, or anything like that.
And there is the hacienda Peon Satuta.
This one is Yaxcopoil.
Yeah, this is Yaxcopoil. But there is
it's one of the largest that was built in Yucatan. This one, the Temozon, and Guayalqué were some of the largest ones that were built in Yucatan.
Right. Here's some pictures, but you can still go and kind of see the process of how to make how they used to get the fiber out.
Yeah, you can do that.
Satuta de
If
Peon.
you want to take a tour, if you want to take a tourist show like that, you can go to Satuta de Peon.
Right.
There used to be a few shredding plants. Huh?
Go ahead.
This one is Mucuiche, but I don't advise to go to this one. This one is like Disneyland.
This one's more of an amusement park because this is actually man-made in here. Although this is
not natural. They broke the rock and they connected two cenotes and they made like a river in between them. This is same people that own Xcaret are the ones that own this place.
Right, right.
And they just make like a thematic places.
It is very beautiful, and the hacienda is very beautiful.
The hacienda is beautiful, but the rest of it, what they made is it's like Disney World. I don't like it.
It's more of a it has the man-made.
Exactly.
But and a lot of the haciendas also have pretty spectacular cenotes under them as well.
The ones that are close to not too far away from Merida, you can still find the cenotes. This one is a Teya.
Teya. Now Teya was never a Hennakin. They were.
It was a Hennakin. Where they have a ballroom that used to be the machine house.
It was cattle first, and then it was Hennakin.
Exactly. Many of them were cattle, and they turned into. Some of them kept the activity of cattle, and added the Hennakin, but many of them just abandoned the other activities and concentrated in being only Hennakin.
Right. Yeah. Which is understandable, seeing as how that was the cash cow.
Which one?
Which one? This one I think was.
The one that is close to Yaxcopoil, Ochil. This one is Ochil. It used to be a restaurant that is closed now forever. It's closed for good. It's gone. All this pandemic made it close. This one is Temozon.
Temozon, right?
Which is one of the largest that was built here.
Their restaurant's open now. And it's a hotel.
It's working as a hotel. It's working as a hotel nowadays, and they have a restaurant.
Yeah. So those are some of the spectacular haciendas here that you can see. Well, we've been chatting up a storm. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome, of course, to pop in and put a comment down or ask a question to Carlos if you so desire. But we'll go ahead and kind of wrap this up. This was really interesting about the history, and I really encourage everybody to go out and see the haciendas and check out some of the history of Yucatan. It was a very important part of the history, but I also think it's important to recognize the dark history as well, and so that we can respect that dark history as well and be knowledgeable for that. But I also want to a little side note. If anybody saw our live last week, Carlos is going to be guiding a tour to Calakmul, and I'm going to be posting about that this weekend a little bit more in detail. So if you are interested in going with Carlos on a trip at the end of March, what days are those is that going to be, Carlos?
Well, it's going to be in a weekend. It depends also if there's somebody interested in going, we can check out the days that they can do that. It will be from Friday to Tuesday.
Friday to Tuesday. So
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday we'll be back.
Right, and Calakmul is a bioreserve. You'll see Mayan ruins. You'll see animals, maybe jaguars, monkeys, orchids, and then also some of the surroundings. And of course, you'll have Carlos, which is worth gold. Just going with Carlos, the celebrity tour guide here. You would learn a lot. So if you already know you're interested, then message me, and I will. Like I said, I'm going to be posting about the itinerary and what you can expect on that trip. So
and
if
also,
you can make it this trip,
in some of the villages that we're going to visit, they have craft workshops where they work with wood, with embroidery, and all the kinds of materials. And there was also a co-op that is producing the Melipona honeybee.
Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of
one of these places, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating things that you would
there's a lot of things there.
Experience on this trip.
And the jungle itself is just amazing.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And the bats. There's going to be you're going to see hundreds of bats leave their cave.
Hundreds, millions.
You'll have a really fantastic experience. So yeah, so I'm putting Carlos's name, his phone number, his WhatsApp, and his email down below. So if you want to contact him either for the Calakmul trip or for any other trip that you might want to get together in Yucatan or in southern Mexico, if you have a group coming or some family and you want to contact him personally, there's his information. So thanks so much, Carlos.
Oh, thank you.
We'll see you next Wednesday for another topic. Oh, and another thing, if you are interested in a specific topic, be sure to let us know, and I will choose different topics that everybody's interested in. So thanks, Carlos.
Thank you.
Great chat.
Bye-bye. Have fun at the beach.
Oh, yes, I will.